everyone. Welcome to Risk Roundup. The fear of the potential use of wireless technologies as a covert weapon system is becoming very, very real. The reason behind that is if the wireless technologies can be used for cyber attacks, monitor, synchronize, and alter a heart rhythm, with modification, it could very well be used to alter brain waves or any other anatomical functions. Since the backbone of the internet, the infrastructure of networks upon which the internet traffic travels, has gone from being a passive infrastructure for communication to an active weapon of attacks, it is important to understand what has changed, where are the gaps, what has enabled internet to be weaponized, and which layer of cyberspace is easy to weaponize, and which layer of cyberspace weaponization will have the biggest impact to our safety and security. So is it the Wi-Fi? Is it the 5G? To discuss this further, I'm delighted to welcome James Keating to Risk Roundup. James is the Vice President of Product Strategy at Zimperium and is based in the United States. Welcome, James. We're honored to have you on Risk Roundup.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Wonderful, James. So how did the internet end up becoming an active weapon for attacks?
Well, I think the reality is once everything started getting connected to it, once our lives went digital, then it was a natural thing to start going that direction. And also, I think as a practical matter, one of the advantages of all technology, software, hardware, et cetera, is the whole thing about scale, right? You can produce something very simply that can have wide scale because you don't have to manufacture something over and over and over again. So even in cyber, it works that way. It takes a certain amount of capital and a certain amount of resources to be able to, for instance, build a bomb. Right? But then you've got one bomb. In cyber, if you put less resources, you have no manufacturing, if you produce something like malware, you can spread it repeatedly with very little scaling costs. So it's this weird thing where everything's connected, but also it's much more cost effective to be able to go after it if you're an adversary.
Yes, very true. Now, it is said that depending on how the internet traffic passes through and which country it passes through, determines the vulnerability for weaponization. So, from your assessment, what role the country's infrastructure plays in the weaponization of the internet?
It's a really good question. I think the interesting thing is if I kind of look at it from very simplistically two parts, right? You've got the backbone, and then you've got local distribution. Even think of it almost like in a phone company standpoint. The backbones are going through all of these countries, and to a certain extent, from what I've seen, and I'm not an expert in all the backbone parts of things, that doesn't seem to be as much of an issue because it's much more protected. What becomes really interesting is the local distribution, right? So you've got the backbone, but then as it gets out to the endpoints, where people are actually connecting to it, whether it's wired or wireless, that's where there's much more of a chance for potential issues. And that's where we see the majority of issues that are truly national, right? And one of the things that's become very interesting is you don't necessarily even have to control that local network, let's say a Wi-Fi network, right? You don't have to control the local phone company to be able to attack a Wi-Fi network. You can attack that Wi-Fi network itself, and you can do it from a completely different country. So a lot of the laws and local things that have to do with the countries all have to do with the communication up to like a demarcation line. But then when you start going past that, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, that it becomes wide open. And because of technology, you can even control some of those things remotely. It makes the nationalistic thing very difficult. For instance, our first half of the year threat report here at Zimperium, we noticed that almost a third of the fake Wi-Fi networks we detected worldwide during that period of time were all in South Korea. And so, and clearly you sit there and say, okay, who would want to put up a bunch of fake Wi-Fi networks and trick a bunch of folks that have devices in South Korea to connect to them and to send all their traffic through them? Obviously, there's some pretty obvious potential candidates. So, but it's not South Korea, right? So that's why it's a really interesting question, because geographically, you can control your own turf. But what happens if somebody comes into your turf remotely and starts messing around with things? And that's what we're seeing a lot of.
So today, it is possible for anyone to create the Wi-Fi network in any country they want remotely?
It's not easy to necessarily do it remotely, but what is easy to do remotely is travel. I mean, it's not remotely, but you can very easily travel into a new country, and you can very easily set up fake Wi-Fi networks, for instance, all over the place. And we've seen examples. For instance, in October 2017, Russia was actually caught in this particular case. They took what's called a pineapple, which is a fake Wi-Fi network. You can literally almost buy it on Amazon. They bolted those onto drones and flew the drones around a NATO base in Poland. And 4,000 soldiers' phones connected to it. And there was troop movements, microphones, fake orders, all of that stuff being sent. So that's just an example of they were able to come into Poland. In this particular case, were even able to get up drones. Now that's super spy stuff. We've seen other cases where, for instance, you and I were talking before this about Silicon Valley. There's a bus that goes from San Francisco down into the valley that is for people that want to live in the city but work in the valley. And it's free to anybody because it's a recruiting tool. It's free to anybody that works Google, Apple, Facebook, I mean, any of them, right? There's free Wi-Fi, there's free donuts, free coffee. Well, a bunch of technology companies in the valley are customers of ours. And one of the employees of one of those companies kept noticing on our device, on our software, that he was getting warned that the Wi-Fi network was fake. But it was the name of the bus. It was the bus's Wi-Fi network, according to the name. But what it was a guy in a Prius that was right behind the bus every single day, broadcasting Wi-Fi at a higher frequency, and all these laptops and all these phones were connecting and putting all the traffic back through them. So those are a couple local examples. You can do man-in-the-middle attacks and stuff a little bit more easily remotely, but the simple fact is it's just really easy to do. And that just happens to be Wi-Fi. As we start looking to the future, you start looking into Bluetooth and things, and it just becomes a little bit wide open and very difficult to do any kind of nationalistic approach to the whole thing, because you can't be everywhere.
Yes, you are right. We cannot be everywhere. But the challenge is that it seems from what you are telling me is that anybody can set up that fake Wi-Fi network. There are no rules or regulations that someone has to register to, have a Wi-Fi network. Is it that direction we are going, that it's completely free and open to anybody, whoever wants to buy Wi-Fi equipment and buy, and create a network wherever they would like, and there is no registry, no, rules or regulations at this point?
Currently, I mean, no, it varies, I think, a little bit by country. But as a general rule, yes. And one of the dumbest things about smart devices, smartphones, tablets, et cetera, is that unless you actually really know what you're doing, which let's assume that most people don't, because one of the biggest differences on mobile compared to traditional endpoints, let's say from an enterprise standpoint, which I know are a lot of your listeners, right, is if you would ask a security person, what's the biggest risk in an organization since the beginning of cybersecurity, we will have told you, and I've been doing this for 25 years, we'll tell you it's a human being. It's a carbon-based life form, right? Well, that carbon-based life form that terrified us when he was inside of a protected corporate network on a centrally managed desktop with central patch management system and everything, he's now the admin of this device, this supercomputer. He spends 80% of his time outside of the protected corporate network. He decides when he's going to update. There is no patch management system. He decides what networks he's going to connect to. He decides what apps he's going to install, right? So the user, this person that terrifies us when we had control of him, is now in control, right? And one of the things is that where I was saying about the dumbest thing about smartphones, the phone introduces itself to the network, not the other way around.
Yes.
So in the Russian example, I mean, I was kind of laugh about it. I mean, it's like 4,000 soldiers' phone said, "Are you NATO?" And it said, "Yes, I am," and it connected, right? And so it's anybody can put up any network and then just wait, because when the phone comes and says, "Hey, are you Starbucks?" The network just goes, "Yes," and
Yes.
you're connected.
Yes.
Now there are some things that are coming down the pipe, that can help change some of that a little bit. But right now it's not here, and even those are technological ideas, and not mandated ideas, right?
Yes, very true. Now, another issue that I see with our networks is that, irrespective of whether it's Wi-Fi or fiber line or fiberless, is that all this data that travels on the network, it's blind unless any data that enters our country. We don't know whether that it's a cyber weapon, cyber missile, or just some MP4 file or MP3 file, or a simple email. And there are no security controls, there are no security checkpoints. So it reaches our state, it reaches our city, it reaches our internet service provider, and then it comes on our computer or smartphone or any smart device. Until then, we have no security checkpoints or no security controls, and we just don't know what is coming our way until we open it. So I think there is a huge gap in here, because if we see our roads, we know we any truck passing has to go through so many checkpoints before it enters the city. So why we have created this network where there are absolutely no security controls? So there is a huge gap. Then that is somewhere technologically we need to figure out how to create the security checkpoints. I mean, we are moving towards homomorphic encryption. Probably it will allow us to see the data that is traveling, that is on our network, so we can see what is in the package that is coming our way, so we can have some timely intervention. So probably in the coming years we'll be able to use homomorphic encryption and other technology to be able to create the security checkpoints. But I think that is where a huge gap is. Now, when we talk about 5G, do you think that 5G cell tower transmission can be adjusted to send more, powerful beams of, all these microwave different bandwidth, that they are using, and create this active denial system, or, create other kinds of attacks? I mean, do you think the attack vector will be changing, significantly with the use of 5G, with the broad, use of 5G?
Yeah. So obviously, there's a lot kind of mixed into what you were just saying, right? So the first part, back on the encryption thing and the visibility thing, the interesting thing is that so many times, and we've seen this, whether it's in cyber or outside of cyber, going back in history again, right? Things that are created for one purpose are then used for another, right? So things like encryption were created so that when my company was, sending traffic, sending information from point A to point B, that unless you could decrypt it, you didn't get to see what was in there, because it was my intellectual property. It was my, treasures, right? And if you think about it, that goes all the way back to, signed, little like, what is that? Da Vinci Code type stuff with little, little cryptics and everything, So even that was even before technology. But now, to your point, the bad guys can put their stuff in, they can encrypt their stuff, and unless we have that key, we can't necessarily see it. But that becomes a really interesting topic of conversation. I was at a summit a little while back, and a former national security advisor was the keynote speaker. And he was talking about what is the role of government in some of these things. And he, to oversimplify what he said was, government needs to be the only guys that are actually engaged in any kind of cyber warfare, right? You go, so if you're a company and somebody hits you, you shouldn't try and hit their servers back again. You're going to get in a lot of trouble. You might be violating laws and everything like that. So he said, that's the domain. He said, but when it comes to this thing about the traffic coming through, I don't want the government looking at my traffic. So I don't really want the government to be able to unlock everything. But then, to your point, you've got the bad stuff that can come through, right? Now, coming back over to your 5G question, and really the broader question of attack vectors. 5G will change the composition in those countries that it really gets widely spread. But there's also still going to be a whole bunch of countries where it isn't, right? And part of the reason that Wi-Fi networks, just coming back to that for a second, part of the reason why Wi-Fi attacks are so powerful in so much of the world is because cellular data is so expensive or so slow in so many parts of the world. So in so many parts of the world, it's literally just part of their DNA to hop onto whatever free Wi-Fi network there happens to be, because it's going to keep my bill down, right, compared to the data programs that I've got. Now, with 5G's capacity, allegedly, that will lower that in those countries that they're in. So when I look at it, I would break it into two parts. The parts of the world where 5G doesn't become predominant for a lot of different reasons, and the parts that it does. For the parts that it doesn't, it's going to continue to be somewhat business as usual with things like how easy it is to put up a fake Wi-Fi network. To your question about, there's no regulation and things like that, and it's so easy to do, and the phone connects, and the user is the admin. How easy is this? It's like shooting fish in a barrel, right? On the 5G side of things, it's going to be interesting to see what variations they have of trying to poison the 5G network. Or, to your point, do I just use it as a very fast network as a bad guy and deliver more phishing attacks, deliver more malware, deliver more device exploits, and not even waste my time trying to play around with trying to poison the network? You know what I mean? And it all comes down to, as you and I were kind of talking about beforehand, as long as there is a reason for me to try to compromise your device, whatever the device is. You talked about some ones going forward in terms of medical devices, whether in addition to IoT and mobile and traditional. As long as there's a reason for me to do it, that whole term of art of advanced persistent threat, right? APT. You hear about it all over the cybersecurity space. In my opinion, an APT is not a technology. An APT is an actor, right? And so as long as that there is an advanced persistent threat, an actor that wants to get at a certain device, they're just going to keep playing with these different devices. Sometimes it'll be networks, sometimes it'll be apps, sometimes it'll be phishing, sometimes, and to achieve their goal because they got time. They're persistent. Right?
Yes, very true. Very true. Yeah, so I mean, the challenge is with the 5G is that all these cellular and Wi-Fi networks, including this 5G network that's emerging, they rely on the microwave radiation, right? I mean, it's a type of electromagnetic radiation that uses different frequencies, different bandwidth, 6 gigahertz or all different kinds of, and to be able to transmit the voice and data. Now, because the 5G doesn't travel long distance, so we have to have so many different antennas in a neighborhood, residential, business neighborhood, everywhere, so the number of antennas that would be there are going to be so many, increasing, so in hundreds of thousands fold. So now if this network is weaponized, I mean, the weaponization can happen in many different ways. It can happen by, sending some malwares, or it can happen by, creating some sort of a control system, mind control system. That there are a lot of experiments going on, and these networks, Wi-Fi networks or 5G networks, they can also be used as a weaponized, control system. It can alter your brain waves. It can alter your heart, rhythm. So if it is used as a weaponized crowd control system or a weaponized, brainwave, manipulation system, then how will we able to, stop this kind of attacks? I mean, anybody can take control over this network and change it in such a way and weaponize it so that anybody who is in the area, all their brain waves are manipulated, and they create all kinds of different symptoms, anxiety, stress, to making them do things that they would never think of doing on their own. So how will we create solutions to stop this kind of weaponization?
That's a great question, and it's interesting because at first when somebody would listen to, let's say, the way that you were just talking about that, it would seem like, okay, that's way out there and it's futuristic, and but there's been documented cases. I mean, especially down in Cuba. I mean, we've I'm sure you've heard about that. Down in Cuba, where a lot of the U.S. diplomats and other guys were having all these memory issues and they determined that it was a variation of what you were talking about. Now, it wasn't to the best of my knowledge, it wasn't connected to 5G, but it's very much there. You know, it's as you were talking, what was going through my head was um, there's a certain type of attack, and then based on that attack and based on the risk that you believe it provides, then you figure out what the solution is against it, right? So when you think about attacks using any kind of a network, like let's talk about the microwave stuff. One goal is information. I want to listen, right? I want to eavesdrop. I want to steal information, right? Another goal is I want to control the destination. Let's say a cell phone in this case, right? And then the third part is I want to control the source, the microwave in the case of what you're talking about. Depending on which one of those things you're trying to solve, you will probably take a fundamentally different approach to how you would solve it, right? So listening over the network, that was the whole point of encryption, you know, being able to do that, you know, so to oversimplify. How do we protect the device? Well, the device is the end device. That's where you get into things like malware protection, any phishing protection, device exploit protection, you know, things on those lines. When it comes to the source, the microwave part, that's a really interesting one. And I don't know, it would be very interesting to see if you even break it down, what am I trying to stop, right? Again, if I'm trying to stop information dissemination, I make sure that encryption is a part of that. If I'm trying to make sure that, you know, no weaponization can get across, maybe we could put some gateway filtering capabilities or something inside there. But if you're talking about doing things like actually using the microwaves themselves, forgetting an end device, or maybe saying that human beings are an end device, that's really interesting. And to be honest, I don't know. It would be something that you know, we'd really have to say, okay, what would you? Because in that case, you would literally be saying somebody has to be manipulating the output itself, right, in a way that would cause some sort of issues like what was happening in Cuba. So I would assume it would be some sort of a regulator that would almost kind of like, I'm thinking out loud, but almost kind of like you know, when you have the coal filters, you've got your coal plants, but before stuff gets out of the coal plant, it's got to go through all these filters now in order to actually. I'm almost picturing that same thing on the microwaves, where it's like there's certain things where it's got to be pure coming out of it the way it's supposed to be, not manipulated. But I don't know. It's a fascinating question and a problem. Honestly, I hope we don't have to deal with, but I have a feeling we will.
Yes, none of us want that problem. But like you said, you know, we are hearing all these cases in Cuba and other places where our diplomats are targeted. And what if, you know, the enemy decides that we want to target the entire country? Then it's very easy for them to use the networks and, you know, target the cell phones, target the, you know, 5G Wi-Fi, you know, antennas. So then we have to, like you were just, you know, saying, that we will have to create filters. So like, you know, in our homes now we have the surge protectors, whole house surge protectors. So the large, you know, amount of electricity doesn't, you know, come, and, you know, it doesn't destroy our appliances and electronics. So maybe we'll have to come up with a solution like that, that every you know, smart device, every computer, every electronic, you know, that has some sort of, you know, filter, some sort of protector. So because, you know, when they try to weaponize the Wi-Fi, they will be using something that would, you know, only impact the brain waves at certain, you know, wavelength. You know, it's not the common wavelength is not going to at the intensity which we are using, you know, the frequency, it's not going to impact our brain waves. There must be something different that they will be doing. So we have to identify what, you know, frequency and what wavelength that they will be using, what bandwidth they will be using, that would be impacting the human brain waves, and we create a filter for that so that, you know, it doesn't reach. So we will have to.
You know, it's interesting for me as you're talking. It's also making me think about you know, smart meters and things on those lines, and in cybersecurity, almost anybody who's spent any time in cybersecurity will tell you, if you have physical access to a device, you can crack it.
Yes.
Right? If you have physical access to a device, you can crack it. So with smart meters, the default is assume a smart meter can be cracked, okay? Because it's on the side of people's houses. So you can't keep it out of people's hands. That's why it's supposed to be there. So now I've got this device. So then the next logical thing is, how do I make sure that if somebody cracked a smart meter, they can't spread through the rest of the grid, right? That it's contained. When we're having this kind of discussion about the microwave, and obviously it's a part of what you guys do, right? You discuss ideas and you kick things around and go, hey, what about, to me, in this brief little time thinking about it, if I was starting to design a solution for this, it would minimally have two parts. One would be the part we're talking about. How do we filter something coming out of any given microwave? Let's assume somebody can maybe, and obviously it's much harder to get after a microwave than it is to a smart meter. Let's assume somebody can get a hold of it, right? So how do we stop that coming out the other end? But then to your point about if somebody wanted to weaponize it to attack simultaneously multiple microwaves, the backhaul. How do we prevent remote control of multiple? How do we recognize that there is multiple attempts at the same time? How do we filter that? How do we gate that so that the instructions can't even reach the point that that individual microwave can produce things? But I don't know. But that, like we were talking about, that's one of the cool things about what you guys are doing is throwing ideas around and then what ifing. Right? Okay. And part of it is the red team and the blue team, right?
Yes.
How would I go about doing this if I was the bad guy is probably going to be how we end up stopping it as the good guy.
Yes, absolutely. That's all about strategic security, right? We have to visualize what different kinds of weaponization can happen, what different kind of security risks can emerge that would impact not only our human health, but our homes, our, electronics, our, data, everything we have to visualize. And then we have to see, what is more important to solve right now. And then we start, addressing those security risks so that we can prepare our country, we can prepare solutions to protect the future of the humanity, because there is no way to know who is going to do what in the coming years.
Right.
And we cannot just sit back and wait for something to happen and then start thinking of solutions. We have to start thinking of all kinds of, weaponization that could happen now or in the coming years, and start thinking of the solutions now, so that when those kind of attacks happen, we will be prepared. Because think of this, North Korea can, use electronic warfare. There are many, they are already working on that. Many countries are working on it.
Mm-hmm.
So if there is an EM attack, I mean, we are talking broader, bigger attack that could, destroy the entire country's electronics. It could take us back to the Stone Age. Or if there is someone, he just has, a small briefcase-sized, weapon, they can just be near a company and launch an attack, and we won't even know what destroyed all of our data. Because there is no way to know that, who is targeting us using electromagnetic weapons. So there are a lot of cases, that we read, in public, that these suddenly, the data was lost, suddenly the connection was lost, the GPS stopped working. So there is all kinds of things we are hearing, and we need to understand what could be at the root cause. We need to understand what are the risks emerging that's coming our way. So people like you, technologies like you
Right.
can start thinking about the solutions, you can start thinking about the products that would be necessary in the coming years, and we start working on that. So having said that, what would you like to tell our global viewers and listeners about your organization's vision for securing Wi-Fi?
Yeah. So thank you for asking. And so what Zimperium does is we're very, very good at two things, and I can say it because I don't do either one of them. We're very, very good at detecting attacks on mobile devices and then IoT, which is related. Very similar closed operating system, environment in both those. And we're very good at putting our stuff in other people's stuff. And so we have, I think, around 70 or 80 million endpoints around the world and growing. And we power some of the mobile security solutions of some of the biggest telcos and some of the biggest security companies in the world. So our approach has been, back to the three different vectors we were talking about earlier, our approach is to protect the endpoint device themselves or the mobile apps themselves, and basically inoculate them and give them an awareness of bad Wi-Fi's in this particular case when you're asking the question. So our our mission, we fundamentally believe, because you asked a great question about the regulation around Wi-Fi networks and things on those lines. We fundamentally believe that networks are still going to be wide open. It's still going to be the wild, wild west. The only thing we can control is the device itself. And so we are focused on doing all of our detection. What we do is we do all of our detection on device. The reason we do that is 9 out of 10, 90% of the targeted attacks against enterprises, which is what we're here to focus on, start with a bad Wi-Fi. And so putting all of your detection up in the cloud, like we're used to doing on traditional endpoints when we control the network, doesn't work. So we basically said you have to do all of your detection on device, and you need to be able to detect the attacks. And today's attacks are device exploits, network attacks, malicious apps, and mobile phishing. But then we see other ones that are coming along the lines. Do you use Bluetooth for delivering exploits instead of using Wi-Fi as Bluetooth beacons and stuff start to come in? So fundamentally, we're trying to help by identifying where bad Wi-Fi networks and the like are occurring. But what we're really doing is we're trying to inoculate the phone to be able to protect itself when such a bad Wi-Fi network occurs, along with the other attack vectors. But to your great questions about what happens in 5G, and does that fundamentally change things, and are there new attacks that can start occurring using the cellular network that we have to look at that's different than the ones we're experiencing on Wi-Fi's? Those are all the things that we're just continuing to expand our view on.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much, James, for participating in the Risk Roundup today. We appreciate your thoughtful insight on the weaponization of Wi-Fi, and our global viewers and listeners, I'm sure, will benefit tremendously from the information you shared on the emerging threats, or where we need to focus on to bring meaningful changes to their nation's ecosystem. Based on the discussion we had today, this Risk Roundup dialogue has been of service, and we thank you for that. So Risk Roundup, a global initiative launched by Risk Group, is a security risk reporting for risk emerging from existing and emerging technologies, technology convergence and transformation happening across cyberspace, aquaspace, geospace, and space. We at Risk Group believe that risk management, security, and peace, they walk together hand in hand. Though security is related to management of threats and peace to the management of conflict, risk management is related to management of security vulnerabilities as well as management of conflict. And it is not possible to conceive any one of the three without the existence of the other two. All three concepts feed into each other. We believe that the security we build for ourselves is precarious and uncertain until it is secure for everyone across nations. Tradition becomes our security, so if we build a culture of managing risk effectively, it will lead us to security, and security will lead us to peace. Let's manage the existing and emerging risks together. For more information on the Risk Roundups, to watch the Risk Roundup videos or hear the Risk Roundup podcast, please go to riskgroupllc.com and do not forget to subscribe and share. Until next time, I'm Jayshree, host of Risk Roundup, signing off. See you next time. Thank you.